Let's talk about the war in Ukraine. And we know that the US president is giving the Europeans a hard time and they've been sidelined. He's talking to Putin directly, who is tarrying and not taking a peace deal. Do you think that the current US president is our best bet to end the war? And if Putin does not take his deal, will Trump be inclined to use force?
The war in Ukraine was a terrible debacle that the United States sadly walked into over a 30-year period by expanding NATO, despite Russia's continuing objections. Don't come closer to our border, don't come closer to our border. I know it. I was President Gorbachev's on his economic advisory team 36 years ago. I was President Yeltsin's economic advisor. I was Ukraine's economic advisor to President Kuchma, so I know both sides. The basic point was Russia wanted some space so that the United States wasn't pushing its missile systems, its Aegis missiles, its military bases right up against Russia's borders. But the United States said, we go where we want, when we want, where we want, how we want. And the war finally ensued. The war could have ended in 2022. Ukraine and Russia were about to sign a peace agreement based on neutrality for Ukraine. But the United States said, no, 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 we want military bases, we want NATO there, don't sign the agreement. So Ukraine continued to fight. So will Trump end this? He could end this. He just has to say very clearly, publicly, explicitly, NATO will not enlarge to Ukraine. That is over. We will not be next to Russia, pushing ourselves into Russia's front yard, basically. And if the U.S. does this, there will be peace in Ukraine because the war will end. It's been a war over NATO enlargement. The war will end on that basis. Unfortunately, President Biden insisted to the last day NATO will expand to Ukraine. President Trump knows it's not right, but he hasn't quite said it yet. So we're close to the war ending, but we're not quite there yet.
From what I understand, the door to a NATO entry is more or less shut for Ukraine. But what you're saying essentially is that you're holding NATO responsible for the war. You're saying this is a war of their making?
Look, I was there when Gorbachev ended unilaterally the Soviet military pact called the Warsaw Pact. He ended it and said peace, and the United States should have ended NATO at that moment. But the United States didn't end NATO. The United States immediately said, we expand NATO. Actually, not immediately. They told President Gorbachev on February 7th, 1990, James Baker III, NATO will not move 1 inch eastward, not 1 inch. Hans-Dietrich Genscher, the foreign minister of Germany, NATO will not move eastward at all. I was there in those days. They promised. They lied. When the Soviet Union ended, President Clinton in 1994 began NATO enlargement. And Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote a book in 1997 explaining Russia will have no choice but to acquiesce. So it was kind of like playing a poker game. They gambled Ukraine's safety, and they lost. And it was a terrible mistake. And all of the senior diplomats in the United States knew it at the time. Jack Matlock, George Kennan, people that I was dealing with knew that this was a disastrous policy, very dangerous and very provocative. But the politicians went ahead with it anyway because they had the idea that the U.S. was the sole superpower and it could do what it wants.
You've said in the past that Ukraine could become the Afghanistan of Europe. Do you still fear that? As a country, as a power that engages with both sides, do you see a role for India in future peace talks?
I see a huge role for India in playing a major diplomatic role in the world. If I could tell you a little secret, just a little secret. My advice is be friendly with China and say to China, you must admit us as, you must vote now that we become the 6th permanent member of the UN Security Council. How can we have a Security Council without India being a permanent member? It makes no sense at all. And I want China to be your strong supporter of that. I really do. I know that India can help to bring peace in the world. This is actually a peace-loving country. You just had 600 million people peacefully assemble in the Maha Kumbh Mela. Unbelievable. We can't have 100 people in my neighborhood get together without a brawl. And if you have 1,000 people, someone gets shot. And you just had 600 million people come.
I think that calls for a big round of applause.
So I want you in the Security Council, and I want you to be emphasizing, as you did in the G20 that India so brilliantly led, that the world is one family. That was the motto of the G20. This is the wonderful philosophy of Hinduism also. It's the wonderful philosophy of peace, and you will help bring peace to the whole world. We don't need these wars. This is the most basic point. We do not need conflict. They make no sense. Wars are the result of politics. You end the war not by war, but by political solutions. You end the war in Ukraine by Ukrainian neutrality and stopping NATO enlargement. You end the war in the Middle East by a state of Palestine as an independent, sovereign state living in peace with Israel. It's obvious. You end the conflicts in East Asia by not having a U.S. military buildup all around the East Asian seaways. This is straightforward. India can help bring that about.
Right. Fun fact about the UN Security Council, there are 5 permanent members, and the one blocking India's entry happens to be China. So when you talk about India working with China, and India has put the best foot forward every time, so there are issues to be resolved there. But since
but just to say,
yes.
I talk to Chinese politicians and the diplomats all the time, and I'm always telling them, admit India as the 6th permanent member.
Yes.
Because it's good for China and it's good for India. It's good for the whole world. And I'm also explaining it's good for China because we need a multipolar world. We're way past the United States leading anything, okay? We want it to be there and be cooperative. Don't make a mess. Be nice. Play with the others, okay? To have that kind of world, India needs to be there, right front and center. And China wants that, so China's not just facing American bashing all the time. So, to my view, what I say to the Chinese diplomats all the time is welcome India into the permanency at the Security Council for your own good as well as the good of the world.
Well, what can I say? I just hope they listen to your very sound advice. But for the moment, China is looking for trouble, not just to its east, but also elsewhere. We've seen the drills around Taiwan. We've seen the military moves in the South China Sea. And with Donald Trump taking a tough transactional posture, do you think regions like Taiwan can depend on American security assurances?
If ever there is a place for Henry Kissinger's adage, it is Taiwan. To be an enemy of the United States is dangerous.